We got breaking news into HQ where Mike Norvell will return as Florida State's head coach next season. Norvell's status in Tallahassee has come under question in the midst of back-to-back disappointing seasons. After leading the Noles to an unbeaten regular season back in 2023, Norvell has gone 7-17. Their most recent loss at NC State on Friday was punctured by 2 muffed punts in the fourth quarter. His buyout also plays a factor here. He would be owed over $50 million if he were to be fired this year. And with that, we bring in our Matt Zenitz from 24/7 Sports. And I got to ask you, how did this happen?
Well, there have been a lot of speculation about this, obviously, just around the industry during the course of the past several weeks. And the buyout, frankly, played a significant role, it seems like, in the decision to ultimately retain Mike Norvell. So, like you mentioned, the buyout, if Florida State had chosen to fire Mike, would have been in excess of $50 million, getting close to the $60 million number. That's a lot of money. And despite the fact that Florida State is 3-13 in ACC play the last 2 seasons under Mike, that buyout number is one of the reasons that the Seminoles are ultimately sticking with him as head coach heading into 2026 now.
Well, you talk about this $50 million, right, and that buyout being one of the main reasons why they would keep Norvell. Is there any other reasons to keep him when it's just been up and down since that 2023 season?
I mean, that's a huge part of it. It's a lot of money. Yeah. And if not for that, this very easily could have gone a different direction. And look, let's not lose sight of the fact that going back a couple of years ago, this was a 13-1 team that, if not for Jordan Travis getting injured, could have been in the playoffs at that point. I know it seems like a long time ago, but in reality, it was just 2 years ago, the year before they won 10 games. But all of that being said, these last 2 years have just been well below the standard at a proud place like Florida State. And obviously we had the 2-win season last year. They start off on a positive note this season with a win over Alabama was huge at that point. It looked like things were moving in a positive direction. And now ultimately, after winning the first 3 games of the season, Florida State's now dropped 6 of the last 8 games, including a bad loss to NC State going back to the other night, going back to 2 nights ago. But again, there have been continued discussions behind the scenes with Florida State administration, money people from Florida State perspective, administration and Mike Norvell during the course of these past several weeks. And ultimately, the decision was to stick with Mike heading into next year. There are going to be changes made without getting into specifically what, still gathering information on that right now. But we will see now heading into next season if he can find a way to take a step forward. Otherwise, we'll be having the same kind of discussions about Mike Norvell and his status as Florida State's head coach and wondering if could potentially move on come 12 months from now.
Well, we'll see what those changes are. But as you said, for now, Norvell is sticking in his position as head coach of the Florida State Seminoles. Thanks for hopping on with us, Matt, and breaking down this breaking news. And hey, college football lives here. Highlights, instant analysis, playoff debates, breaking news, all in one place. Hit subscribe and stay locked with the CBS College Football all season long on their YouTube channel. Just scan that QR code to subscribe. We've got more on this breaking news coming up next. And you heard it, Norvell is sticking around. Nobody's going for that buyout, that $50 million buyout. Our Emily is here with us, and she will break this down more coming up next.
Let's welcome in Brennan Sonnone from Noles 24/7. Brennan, first and foremost, what do you make of the timing of this decision with where we are in the season?
Yeah, it is peculiar timing because Florida State talked about doing a thorough evaluation process after a loss to Stanford back in mid-October. Since then, they've gone 2-2. 2 more road losses. For what it's worth, this is now almost it will be at least 2 calendar years until Florida State gets without a road victory. So there hasn't been a whole lot of promising data points that have emerged since that statement that Florida State released. It was going to do a thorough, comprehensive review. I honestly think the timing of this, Emily, comes down to Florida State not wanting one more loss on the record at the end of the year at rival Florida, so another road game to end the season, and then have to come out and make an announcement. So I think that's kind of what comes with the timing. It, again, doesn't make a ton of sense to me. That's really the only rationale you can kind of apply to it at this point.
I mentioned the end of the regular season game against Florida, so their conference season is over, meaning that Norvell has gone 3-13 in conference since the start of last season. Of course, that's all after going undefeated in the season and winning the conference the year prior. But overall, Brendan, now that this news is out, what's the feeling in Tallahassee right now with the fans knowing that he's staying around?
Well, the Noles 24/7 message board is not super thrilled, and that is not always a total, accurate depiction of the entire fan base. I will give the fan base a lot of credit. Attendance for the last 2 home games against Wake Forest, Virginia Tech was pretty darn good. And so there are a lot of people who still support Mike Norvell and like the way he's represented the school, like him personally, and so I think that it still exists. But I do think the most diehard of the diehard fans, the ones who are engaging, and consuming products about Florida State every single day, I do feel a level of hopelessness. There's not a whole lot of great prospects in terms of recruiting right now. You've already made your big plays with Mike Norvell as well in terms of firing coordinators and hiring coordinators this past offseason. I guess up next is you're probably going to do, I can report a thorough evaluation of the front office, but you're really kind of running out of cards to play, and I think that kind of leads to a level of hopelessness amongst a lot of fans.
Yeah, that was something that they mentioned in the statement is some of these changes that they will undergo. But something that you said is recruiting. How does knowing now that Mike Norvell will be the head coach entering next season and this offseason, how does that affect recruiting?
That's one of the things with the timing of the statement, Emily, I can't really quite grasp is if the on-field product was really going to be a determining factor in this evaluation process, why do this charade for a month and change where you go 500, continue to not live up to the Florida State standard in terms of wins and losses, and then you do it now? I guess it's better now than waiting another week and with the early signing period. That'll help you somewhat with recruiting. You're going to retain Mike Norvell, so you can at least sell that now. You don't get negatively recruited in that regard. But it makes, again, this whole decision, this whole last month and a half really, really confusing.
Yeah, and something that you told me just real quick, we'll end here. Before we hopped on here, just kind of exasperated, said, this is going to be a long off season. Can you expand on that now that we know that Mike Norvell is returning? What does that do to this off season, not just from a fan base perspective, but from what you've got to cover?
Yeah, and I think they are kind of co-aligned is there's a lot of apathy. I would imagine there's a lot of people canceling, and we'll see if they follow through with it, but on the board right now talking about not just canceling subs to Noles 24/7 because they don't want to continue with the product, but more importantly for supporting the football program. Talking about people canceling boosters, donations, canceling to the Battle's End, FSU's NIL collective. And so we will see what that looks like when the dust settles, how much it actually is. But there's a lot of people who are just kind of angry and over it. And without recruiting, right now, I think the class is ranked somewhere in the top 15, top 12 to top 15. Not really moving into the space of being high blue chip ratio, not having a ton of talent on deck, and even this team is relatively older. You're going to have to replace most of your offense, a bunch of big pieces on defense. There's not a whole lot of hope to sell right now, and that's not just for me from a coverage standpoint. I don't know what the program can sell. So we'll see what moves they make, what kind of acquisitions they can make in terms of front office personnel that will help with recruiting. I'm skeptical of it, frankly, but that's kind of all you're left with at this point. You don't again have a whole lot of cards left to play.
Yeah, and I'm sure whatever cards they play, Brendan, you guys will be all over it at Noles 24/7. We appreciate you, and of course, you can get even more coverage from these guys, the college football insiders. Matt Zenitz, of course, one of them, breaking this news here that Mike Norvell will be retained by Florida State. You can watch those podcasts on YouTube by scanning that QR code or listen wherever you find your pods.